Alright, so as we can see, the coefficient b and how it changes the graph is a little tricky. So let's take the last video and take it a little step further. Now we saw that b shifts the graph left and right, but whether you go left or right changes based upon what a is. And so it turns out what we're really trying to do is we're trying to figure out where the graph is centered. Where will the middle of the graph be? And that has a very specific name, which is called the axis of symmetry. It's a line that determines the very center of the graph where the left side and right side are symmetrical. They're mirror images. And it turns out to be a formula. And it turns out the axis of symmetry, the way you would write it is that you would put a line at x where x is equal to negative b over 2a. And so this way it combines what b does with shifting the graph left and right with what a does and how it changes that, as we saw in the last video. And so this is a formula we want to commit to memory. And in fact, you kind of already have it committed to memory if you think about it and you think of the quadratic formula that we did a while back. Negative b is how the quadratic formula starts off, and then there's that whole plus or minus square root thing. And then divided by 2a is the last part of the quadratic formula. So if you know the quadratic formula, you kind of already know this formula. It's just the very first part and the very last part of the quadratic formula. Alright, so let's actually see how that works. So let's say I'm graphing this problem. Well, one of the things I can do is I can find where the graph is going to be centered by taking b and a. Now once again, the formula is x equals negative b over 2a. So just like with the quadratic formula, what I would do is I would first rewrite it like this. Negative b, and just put a blank set of parentheses for b, over 2a, and then a blank set for a. Plug in my numbers. B is positive 4, a is 3, and if I simplify that, I get negative 4 over 6, which is negative 2/3. So that means when I get to actually graphing my work, it would turn out that if I were to make a graph, that x is negative 2/3. So meaning on the x-axis I find negative 2/3, which would be right about here. And what I would put is a dotted or dashed line here to show that my parabola is going to be centered around this line. So I'd probably get some kind of picture where it looks, you know, like this. Oops, it's not quite centered, a little bit sloppy, but you can see how this is supposed to be with the parabola where the left side is the mirror image of the right side. I just can't draw it very well on this tablet. Okay, let's do one more like that. 5x squared minus 3x plus 7 equals 0. And before I start graphing, I want to know where this graph is centered. Is it centered over on the left or on the right? So again, x equals negative b over 2a. b in this case is negative 3. And once again, you can see the need for parentheses. That way this negative from the formula and our negative 3 stay separate. Over 2a, and a is 5 right here. And so we get negative negative 3, which is positive 3, over 2 times 5, which is 10. So once again, if I were to take the time to graph this right now, which we'll do some examples of later, the graph this time would be centered over to the right, over at 3/10, which I'm going to approximate is right there. And so what we do is we put a dotted line here. So our coefficient b is a little tricky. And in fact, I wouldn't even really worry about just b by itself. Remember this formula, the axis of symmetry formula. X equals negative b over 2a. And that's going to help us out a lot when it comes to graphing and doing it quickly.